What if the very tools meant to keep you safe were used to destroy you? On April 2018, in a quiet Florida home, Keith Johansen looked police right in the eye and told them his wife, Brandy Salenza, had shot herself in a tragic accident. It was a simple, desperate lie, but the deepest psychological clue wasn't what he said. It was what his elaborate high-tech home security system secretly recorded. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and today I'm providing my mental health analysis of the Keith Johansen case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes, I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. My analysis is based on my speculations, not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. How does a sudden eruption of violence shatter a seemingly ordinary domestic life? What kind of psychological framework allows an individual to construct and maintain a web of elaborate lies, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence? These are the complex psychological questions at the core of the Keith Johansen case. A tragic story that unfolded on April 7, 2018 in Palm Coast, Florida. The immediate, most compelling mental health indicator present in this case is a pattern of profound deception and narrative manipulation. When the deputies arrived at the home of Keith Johansen and his wife, Brandy Salenza, Brandy had been shot twice. Keith Johansen was quick to provide a narrative for the incident. Initially, he told a 911 dispatcher and responding officers that Brandy had accidentally shot herself. This was his first story, a simple tragic accident. However, as the investigation moved forward, this narrative began to crack, and his attempts to control the situation through continuous deception became a central and psychologically fascinating aspect of the case. The immediate pivot to a false narrative is a strong behavioral clue. The psychological need to control the post-event narrative suggests an attempt to manage the perception of reality, which often stems from a deeper need for power and control within a relationship. This is the core psychological angle we must explore in this case. The backstory reveals that Brandy, a vibrant 25-year-old mother, had been married to Keith Johansen, who was 36 at the time. Their relationship, which outwardly appeared normal, was reportedly spiraling into a toxic dynamic. Just days before the shooting, police had obtained a home footage which showed the couple engaged in a heated argument. This footage would later become critical, as it established the pattern of conflict and contradicted the image of an entirely harmonious household. The psychological indicator of rapidly changing narratives continued to escalate as law enforcement focused on Keith Johansen. As a medical examiner ruled Brandy's death a homicide, Keith was forced to abandon his initial accidental self-shooting claim. His next version of the events was a shocking attempt to deflect blame on their young son, then only 6 years old. To suggest a child was responsible for the crime, even indirectly, represents a profound lack of remorse and a chilling willingness to inflict further psychological trauma to protect himself. Psychologically, this is an act of an extreme emotional detachment and self-preservation, signaling a significant deficit in empathy and moral development. A person operating with a typical moral and emotional frameworks would be unable to conceive such malicious attempt to scapegoat a child. The psychological profile of Keith Johansen reveals a history that points toward a pattern of coercive control. The background of the case shows that an elaborate home security system was installed in their residence. While security systems are common in the context of this domestic violence, such technology can become a tool for intrusive monitoring and control. This raises the psychological question of whether the system was installed for general safety or as a means for Keith to exert surveillance and dominance over Brandy's daily life. The psychological motive of control is often deeply rooted in an individual's own feelings of inadequacy or insecurity, leading them to seek absolute authority over another person to stabilize their internal world. This pursuit of control is not about the victim, but about the perpetrator's own fragile sense of self. This need for absolute control manifested in other ways. Records show that Keith Johansen had a history that included a protection order against domestic violence. This is a crucial piece of the psychological puzzle. The psychological concept of repetitive compulsion suggests that the patterns of behavior established in one relationship are often repeated in subsequent ones. The existence of a prior protective order points to a long-standing unaddressed issue with aggression and control that carried out over into the relationship with Brandy. It creates a psychological framework suggesting that the violence on April 7, 2018 was not an isolated act of rage, but rather the culmination of a chronic escalating pattern of controlling behavior and potential domestic abuse. This is the why of the crime. Further complicating the psychological picture is Keith Johansen's behavior, both immediately following the crime and during the eventual trial. When he was on the stand, admitting to the shooting but claiming self-defense, his final desperate narrative, witnesses and court reporters noted a striking absence of grief or emotion. He appeared unsympathetic, lacking in remorse, and even chuckled at certain points during the proceedings. This behavior, in the context of being accused of murdering one's wife, is a strong indicator of emotional flatness or blunted affect. Psychologically, a blunted affect is a diminished intensity of emotional expression and can be a feature in various psychological profiles, particularly those marked by profound narcissism or psychopathy. It signals a severe disconnect between the magnitude of the event and the individual's emotional response to it. This lack of expressed emotion served as a powerful psychological clue for the jury, suggesting that his actions were not driven by impulsive momentary self-defense, but were a part of a planned act for which he felt no guilt. It challenged his claim of self-defense, which requires a reasonable fear and emotional reaction consistent with that fear. The prosecution successfully argued that Keith Johansen's final narrative, the self-defense claim, was yet another layer of deception. The fact that the home security footage directly contradicted his initial reports was the aha moment in the case. The footage, once recovered and reviewed, showed that his timeline and description of the events were false. The clues that were planted, the claims of Brandy shooting herself accidentally, or the suggestion of the child's involvement, were exposed as psychological maneuvers to buy time and mislead investigators. The full circle moment is the realization that the lie of the self-defense was just as fabricated as the lies of the accident and scapegoating. His actions after the shooting were not those of a victim of an attack, but of someone trying to cover up a premeditated act. Ultimately, the jury rejected Keith Johansen's claim of self-defense, finding him guilty of first-degree murder. They deliberated for less than 3 hours, suggesting they saw right through the various psychological manipulations and consistent lack of emotional veracity. The fact that the jury came to a unanimous decision so quickly is a testament to the psychological impact of his shifting stories and unemotional testimony. It created a perception that his entire defense was built on a foundation of lies, a profound indicator of personality pathology centered on grandiosity and pathological deceit. This case illustrates how the psychological need for absolute dominance within a relationship can ultimately lead to tragedy. The series of psychological indicators, from the coercive control tactics like the surveillance system to the profound lack of empathy, the emotional detachment in court, and the relentless attempts to manufacture a false reality, all points to a deeply disturbed psychological framework. The victim, Brandy Salenza, represents the ultimate cost of a relationship defined by unchecked psychological control. Her life and the life of her young son were irrevocably shattered by one person's refusal to concede power or accept accountability. This case is a compelling reminder that the roots of violence are often found in the psychological dynamics of control, an insidious force that begins long before the physical act itself. The shifting narratives are merely the frantic behavioral manifestations of a mind desperate to escape the consequences of its own deeply rooted need for dominance. Wow. What really strikes me here in this case is that Keith had a previous relationship with a court order that talked about domestic abuse and violence. And I'm wondering if Brandy even knew about that. This really speaks to the importance of knowing who the person is that you get into a relationship with. It's probably not a bad idea if you are looking to date somebody to do a background check and just to make sure there's not a case or other crimes that person has committed. That's kind of a shocking point of this case for me. What do you think about this case? What are some elements that stood out to you? Let me know. I would love to know. I read all the comments that you have. And if you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. If you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.